here in Glasgow for our Turning the Tide conference event. A big warm welcome to all of you in the room, but also a warm welcome to everybody online, because thanks to the wonders of modern technology, people are joining us from all across Europe and probably wider as well. If you're online, there are 2 sessions this morning that you can log into, and there are another 2 sessions in the afternoon which you'll be able to see when you go into the portal. If you have questions for any of our speakers or our panel members, put your questions into the comments boxes and we will be able to access those and feed them into the room. There's also a QR code on the wall and on the lectern here, so you'll be able to follow what is happening in the programme. I'd like to introduce, first of all, to tell us a bit about Turning the Tide, the project, to Iwona Preis, who is our project leader.
Sorry, we just need to Angus Robertson.
Oh, we haven't done Angus Robertson.
Minister
we haven't done our esteemed minister, and I also haven't told you about the toilets out here, the toilets downstairs, through the back, the fire exit here, the fire exit there, and the fire exit there. So apologies for that. And there is no planned fire practice, so if the fire alarm goes off, then it is for real. So first of all, we have a recorded Angus Robertson, who is our Minister for Constitution and External Affairs, was hoping to be with us. He apologises he's not able to join us, but he has sent us a recorded message for our conference, which we're going to hear now.
Hello all, and thank you for inviting me to your Turning the Tide conference, and my sincere apologies that I can't be there with you in person today. The Scottish Government agrees that culture can play a key role in helping the public visualise the potential impacts of climate change, challenge our beliefs, and shift ways of seeing and thinking about how we can live well in a climate-resilient world. Cultural organisations and creative practitioners speak to and engage with a wide range of people, harnessing the power of culture through their cultural assets, programming and content to inform public debate on climate change and enable subsequent behavioural change across society. Screen and broadcasting, for example, can play a critical role in spreading awareness and enhancing audiences' understanding of climate change and influencing behaviours through productions and programming on climate issues. Turning the Tide's pan-European approach to cooperation to deliver on its aims is mirrored in Scotland's international culture strategy. The strategy sets out a vision for the Scottish creative sector to be globally connected with the means and opportunities to achieve its international ambitions and potential and contribute to Scotland's cultural, social, economic and environmental well-being through its international work. International engagement is vital to the culture and creative sector. It supports learning, development and cultural innovation through the exchange of ideas and sharing new ways of doing things. However, there is inevitably a trade-off between capturing the benefits of international engagement and working to reduce climate impact. Providing channels through which to share knowledge and best practice, as you're doing, is vital to understand the steps we can take to address climate change, one of the most important questions of our time. Our international culture strategy also considers this, and I'd be very interested to hear the outputs of your conversations over the coming days. We continue to regret that Brexit has cut access to the Creative Europe programme, the EU's key support mechanism for exchange and collaboration in Europe's culture sector, which I understand your work has been impacted by. The Scottish Government will continue to lobby the UK Government to rejoin the programme while considering how we might develop more direct links as well. I hope you enjoy a fruitful few days of discussion and all that Glasgow has to offer.
I'd like to welcome the leader of our project and president of River Cities Network in Europe, Iwona Preis.
And we have a presentation mode. Okay. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and warmly welcome to this climate summit, which we are arranging in the context of a European project, Turning the Tide. And as you see, the title is Creative Action for Uncharted Climate Emergencies, and the project started last year and will last until 2026. We are happy to be here in Glasgow and Scotland and introduce the project. We are happy to work with our partners, which mainly is Fablevision, with Liz Gardiner as director and the leading person in this initiative. Who we are. We are coming from several European countries. I am Iwona Preis from Intercult, a director of an NGO, a small one, placed in Stockholm. We are initiators of European projects. We are working with diversity of subjects, among others, climate changes. Another organization working with the project is the Urban Culture Institute. The name is in Polish here, Instytut Kultury Miejskiej, a Polish organization from Gdańsk. We have also with us Deer Hunter from Netherlands. We have Artit from Greece. We have Wiener Bildungsakademie from Austria, and as collaborators, Fablevision and River Cities Platform Foundation. So the cities in focus of our actions during those years are Gdańsk, Vienna, Evia, Stockholm, and now Glasgow. What is turning the tide? In short, it's asking a question of how climate changes affect the environmental changes in coastal cities or waterfront cities, and how to socially engage people in environmental issues through culture and art. In practice, Turning the Tide is a 3-year project, as I mentioned, supported by Creative Europe program by the European Union. And the program itself is working with artists mainly, and this is the only fund actually in the European Union supporting culture with quite a small budget, but we have been lucky to get funds from this program twice. The first project, which also has been here, was Memory of Water, leaving some traces at different places in Glasgow, which artists has been working with, and now we are back with Turning the Tide. So the main object of the exercise is working with culture, with artists, with engagement of artists in different questions, and now with this project we are working with the environmental questions. So what are our objectives? There should be a video here, but it's not, so I will stay here. I can turn to this one. Well, the artist mobility, we will be working with 38 artists who are engaged in the project via open calls. There are 2 international artists in each country and 8 local artists, so altogether, no, it's 38 actually. We are working with international mobility, with international creation. We are connecting artists to local organizations in the project cities. We are working with social engagement by using art as a tool in our work. And the target groups are, again, mainly artists, but also you, local citizens, city activists, non-arts professionals, online audiences. By the way, welcome everybody who is listening to us online. Culture operators like Intercult and many organizations working with us. So we are trying to build a bridge between culture, and other sectors in the society, mainly connected to urban planning and climate issues. And what are the expected results? Of course, shared learning, of course, the co-creation, the strengthening of co-creation capacity, to build a platform for us, for artists and activists and everybody who will be engaged. And it's usually several hundred people engaged during those 3 years in that kind of projects. So we are building a platform for future collaborations and connections. And of course, the subject will have the international impact because we are using all our communication channels to send the message, mainly to Europe, but also to the world. The outcome will be the enhanced confidence of us all in the subject of how to work with culture and climate questions, and also transforming the narrative. We have a lot of discussions during those meetings about how to approach the subject, what are the challenges in the city, and what artists can do. So the narratives, the changing of narratives of the cities is very important. Well, we have some milestones. You see the project is quite complicated, but we see the pattern here. We will be in Gdańsk in June, then in September in Vienna, in Greece on Evia, next year in June, and again in Stockholm in September next year. And in all those cities, we have a range of activities, which is, for example, cartopological mapping of the places. We were making maps of culture, anthropological points, everything what can be placed on the map of the place. Artists are doing research, and then they are doing creations, and then we are meeting all the stakeholders in each city. All that is, of course, communicated. We have been in Vienna for the kickoff, and a lot of learning. It was winter by that time. Luckily, we have spring here. We brought you some sun from, not Stockholm really, it's 4 degrees in Stockholm still, but the rest of the Europe, I guess, has a little bit warmer climate. We had webinars with Ghilardi, who will be here on the stage in a few minutes after me. Tara Beale, an activist, artist and researcher from Glasgow, Scotland. Liz Gardiner is a leading researcher and culture activist here in those seminars or webinars, mainly webinars. You can see them on the web page. Well, and now we are here on the Glasgow Climate and Culture Summit, which is our biggest event, and we are really, really proud of creating this meeting and those collaborations. Then there will be another meetings. There will be local urban labs. There will be international urban labs. There will be this cartopological mapping, which I mentioned. We will hear more about it later, and the final conference in Hague in 2026. So this is the project in short. You have the context. And now you are warmly welcome to join the program and to listen to all the people, all the clever people coming after me and speaking about climate and culture and arts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iwona. So yes, as you heard, we have these 5 partners. Fablevision is no longer able to be a partner in the Turning the Tide project due to Brexit, as mentioned by our minister earlier. This is a great sadness, but we are very, very proud to continue our involvement and to be able to host this summit. As Iwona said, our exploration is looking at the role of socially engaged artists in changing narratives around climate change. And as always, Scotland has been at the forefront of that practice for well over a decade now with Creative Carbon Scotland. They have been exploring these the role of artists and where we can impact on dialogues. So I'm very, very honoured to welcome here today Director of Creative Carbon Scotland, Ben Twist. Ben.
Thanks very much, Liz, and hello everyone, both in the room and online. Just something I didn't have in my talk that I've written down because I'm not very good at making things up on the spot. It was very good to hear Angus Robertson basically saying the things we've been batting on about for the last 10 years or something like that. So we're making progress. I feel quite optimistic. Am I talking too close to the mic, or is this okay? It's okay. Liz asked me to outline what it is that Creative Carbon Scotland does, but I only have 15 minutes or so I'm not going to spend very much time on that. If you do want to find out more about us, go to creativecarbonscotland.com and dig into our website, which is full, or you might even say overstuffed, with delights. But it is useful to give a bit of history, and this is actually quite helpful to me at the moment, as I'll come back to. Creative Carbon Scotland started out by focusing on managing the carbon emissions of cultural organisations. And to a large extent, our focus has remained on organisations rather than on individual creative practitioners. So whether I'm going to do the job that I've been asked to do, I don't know. This was deliberate at the beginning, as back in 2011, it felt to us that this was the best way to engage the cultural sector. And I certainly had a nervousness at that point about asking artists and artistic directors to consider how the work they made could focus on climate change. I felt sure that the art was important, but practically I didn't think we could focus on it back then. And actually something I was thinking about overnight, artists also need distributors. You need theatres, galleries, publishers, whatever it may be that allows your work to meet the public. So I think there is something also about the importance of arts organisations here that allow that work to be seen and to be effective. But this soon changed. By 2013, we had already started our programme of Green Teases. Some of the first people who are there are here today, which are relatively informal events which bring together creative practitioners and people working on climate change to encourage collaboration. And they've changed their form a lot since then, but at heart, they try to hear from both climate change and creative practitioners on each occasion. And over the years, we and others have found many partners to work with. And then in early 2016, I attended a week-long workshop called Beyond Green, the Arts as a Catalyst for Sustainability in Salzburg. And this crystallized much of my thinking about the role artists and creative practitioners can play by applying their myriad skills, ways of thinking, and ways of working to climate change projects. Not to create artworks, but to achieve the aims of those projects. We started work then on what we call our embedded artist projects, following the lead of the American architect, sculptor, and experimental urbanist, as she calls herself, Frances Whitehead, where we work with climate change projects to employ artists to be equal members of the project team, along with engineers, administrators, finance people, and so on. I was still perhaps nervous of saying to artists that their artistic work itself could or even should touch upon or discuss climate change. But the times were changing, and looking back, I see that a TEDx talk I gave later in 2016 was very clear that artists have always been and need to be at the center of social change. It outlined the ways in which art has expressed social and indeed scientific change and disseminated complex ideas in society. And following a Brechtian line that I quote in just about every talk I give, I argued that art doesn't just hold up a mirror to society and do that expressing, but it also interrogates that social and scientific change and those complex ideas, asking questions and so leading to further change. And this has become all the more urgent as the climate crisis worsens and the shift in society fails to keep up. So more recently, we have been working on the ability that arts organizations, and so at least to some extent the artists they work with or present, the influence they have the power they have to influence society. Most people in Scotland, far more than would say they're engaged in climate change work, attend some sort of cultural event in any one year. In general, I think we'd all like to believe that the art we make does have an effect on people. So presumably we hope that having attended, they're changed in some way, ideally in the way in which we want them to be. So that influencing role is important, particularly when the climate emergency has become so urgent. Now, I've gone through this history because while we at CCS have taken this journey, often when I talk to people in other countries, they seem surprised that we would consider encouraging artists to make work that touches upon climate change, as opposed to helping them make their art in more sustainable ways. Isn't that interfering with their artistic integrity? Isn't it instrumentalism? What right do we have to do that? And some of you listening may be in those other countries, so it may be useful to hear about the way our thinking has changed. And to put it boldly, I'm not worried about instrumentalism. Art for art's sake is a relatively recent concept when you look at the history of art. And when we face a climate crisis, I don't think we have time for it. And moreover, I come from the world of theatre, which is a deeply impure business, which likes to see bums on seats. Making theatre, making a piece of theatre, requires audiences to come and see your work, otherwise it doesn't exist. And as an artistic director, which I've been, there's nearly always a practical or a financial reason why you program a particular show at a particular time. So not worrying about a charge of instrumentalism comes quite easy to me. I'm not going to force any artist to do something they want to do. That would be counterproductive. But I do want to work with artists who want to make change happen with their work. It's fair to say that we still at Creative Carbon Scotland focus most of our work on organisations rather than individual practitioners, although this is changing and this thinking is useful to me. But clearly this isn't because we're worried about interfering with artistic integrity. It's partly because the climate impacts of individual artists tend to be quite low anyway, so they have not been our main area of work on that side of the organisation. When it comes to influencing society, both organisations and artists are important, and we are putting more effort into that area now. And our embedded artist projects have always been about individual practitioners within climate change projects. But that's enough history. To get to the heart of this short talk, if, as the conference blurb says, artistic expression and cultural engagement are central to understanding and tackling environmental challenge, what is it that artists should be doing to achieve this understanding and tackling? And why is it so important that artists are involved? I think Angus Robertson told us that already. Thinking through this is helpful for me in reviewing the work of Creative Carbon Scotland as we think more about individual artists. I often say that one of the things that art can do is help society to think and to think better. This is particularly obvious in the narrative form of theatre where I used to work, but I think it applies to other narrative forms and also perhaps to less narrative ones too. A play is effectively a thought experiment undertaken by the creative team and the audience, where we all accept the invitation to say, what if X or Y was the case? And we work through that invitation, we work through that together to understand how it would play out, where it would lead to. We create alternative futures and see what happens without, for the most part, anybody getting hurt. So there's certainly something going on there. We are helping individuals, and perhaps more importantly, groups of people, to understand what certain assumptions or beliefs or ways of being might lead to, which itself might lead to change, which would be the tackling. And there's also a stage before the play or the piece of music or the visual art or whatever is produced and this thought experiment takes place. The artist or artists involved need to do their own thinking and exploring, go down some dead ends, get frustrated because their thinking isn't good enough, think again and think better. These climate change questions of how we should live, what we might need to give up, what we will gain, are difficult ones. And artists, jointly or individually, will need to spend time doing their own understanding to share this with audiences. And most people in society don't have the time or perhaps the training or experience to do this hard thinking. Artists do. We need artists to do this thinking for us. Now, there are people in the audience today who do this on their own in a darkened room, traditional playwrights, composers, visual artists, and there are others who do it with and within a group or community, more socially engaged artists. Whichever it is, there will be a struggle for understanding. I think this thinking and struggling for understanding by both artists and the audiences that think collectively and individually about their work is what makes artistic expression and cultural engagement essential to tackling environmental challenge. And by the way, I think it's more important than emotion, which is often what people think and say. that it's the emotional engagement that the art brings that helps move people to action. It's not that difficult as an artist to move people. The right piece of music with the right image, the right form of words will do it. We know how to manipulate people. People do it on YouTube and Instagram, in genre fiction and in advert music all the time. It's much harder to get people to think and think clearly and think so hard that they take action. And if our thinking isn't right, then we'll lead our audiences, viewers, readers, or whatever down the wrong paths. Their actions won't tackle the environmental challenge, or at least not in the right way. The awful truth is that tackling climate change is difficult. It means changing just about every assumption in our lives, everything about the way the world works. And so art that helps people to think is useful. In his terrific book, The Great Derangement, the Indian-American novelist Amitav Ghosh argues that one of the reasons artists have found it hard to address climate change in their work is that it requires thinking and working on an epic scale, which, by the way, I think is quite interesting as an artist. Climate change works across decades and spans continents. And I think he's right about this, and that is hard enough. But it also requires us to think truly impossible things, preferably before breakfast. Completely different societies and human relations, a very different relationship between humanity and the rest of nature, a different economics. In a way, our embedded artist projects are based on this need to think the impossible. Most of the people around the table in planning and implementing a climate change project are trained and skilled in delivering the possible. The excellent ones will be good at pushing the boundaries, extending the possibilities of engineering or finance or politics. But an artist can ask them to go beyond the possible to help extend those boundaries even further. Once you've imagined the impossible, it becomes conceivable. The job then, for those other people, is to work out how to make it happen. To recap a bit then, in trying to unpack what is meant by that sentence from the conference blurb, artistic expression and cultural engagement are central to understanding and tackling environmental challenge, I'd argue that the reason they are central is because artists themselves do thinking and then help society do thinking about this really challenging and knotty problem that asks us to change everything about the ways in which we see and live in the world. Artists can help others to think and work differently in climate change projects, and those projects need all the help they can get. Another thing that Liz asked me to speak about was what the future holds, what we will be doing next. The answer is that we are increasingly thinking about transformational change for cultural organizations and for society, and what artists and art's role might be in achieving that change. At our Springboard Assembly last year, which was a 4-day online non-conference, we asked what we called cohorts of people with shared challenges to work through a process that enabled them to understand the systemic blockages to change, blockages that they were unable to address individually or just with their own organizations. It helped them think through how they might work together across boundaries between arts and non-arts, between funder and funded, between civic society and statutory bodies. It helped them think about systemic change. And remarkably, of those 12 cohorts, 8 are still working together in one form or another. Some people have used the methodology for working together that we provided to do their own thinking back in their organizations. That was a good process. It worked, at least for most people, and I think a lot of people learned a lot from it, and we certainly did. But probably most of the cohorts were still working and thinking within the boundaries of their current system, their current activity. They were thinking, how do we unblock those systems so that we can reduce our carbon emissions more effectively, or something along those lines. However, there are twin crises facing us which demand more. The climate crisis is more urgent than ever. The impacts are stronger and coming more quickly than even the scientists imagined a few years ago. We are failing across the board to meet the necessary carbon reduction targets, or maybe even maintain the target. Although I remain optimistic because more carbon dioxide was emitted in the 30-odd years since 1992 than during the whole of human history before that. So it must be possible to achieve radical reductions in the next 30 years. Despite my optimism, we need to act now and act faster. And meanwhile, we're facing an inequality crisis. Globally, nationally, and locally, inequality is tearing communities and society apart and hurting our very humanity. To address these challenges requires greater change, what we're describing as transformational change. And it might help to say what I mean by this. There's a really helpful definition from the health think tank, the King's Fund. Transformational change is defined as the emergence of an entirely new state, prompted by a shift in what is considered possible or necessary, which results in a profoundly different structure, culture, or level of performance. It is different from correcting or enhancing an existing process, which is described as incremental change. Transformational change requires a fundamental rethink to create completely different, more effective ways of addressing the same problem. It seems to me that the clue is in the name. To transform is to turn into something different. We at CCS think that not only do cultural organizations themselves need to undergo transformational change in the face of these crises, but that all of society will need to. And if that change isn't embarked on voluntarily, it will probably be forced upon us. The changes wrought by the pandemic, which we are still recovering from and responding to, although it may seem in the past, are both an additional driver for change and a rehearsal for it. Over the next few months, therefore, we at Creative Carbon Scotland will be thinking and learning about how to achieve transformational change. We think that many cultural organizations themselves will need to become very different organizations if they are to be useful to society in addressing these interlinked crises. And as these crises bite, there will be less room for organizations that aren't addressing them. And we think that artists, creative practitioners, and cultural organizations can help other parts of society in their transformation, along the lines of the embedded artist work that I outlined above. We're going to need artists to help us think through this next stage. Thanks very much.
Ask him some questions, or are these mics?
1, 2, 1, 2.
Hello? They are working.
1.
Thank you so much, Ben. That's transformational change. That's exactly the arena that Turning the Tide is hoping to explore over the next few years. Ambitious, yes, but it's really a microcosmic experiment, a little seed to plant, to try to see if socially engaged practice, if artists working with communities, with all cross-sectoral practitioners, and reimagining to see if they can actually impact on that effort to make transformational change. It's fascinating to hear the journey that Creative Carbon Scotland has done. I was one of those original Green Teas. I think it was in Edinburgh's Nelvo or something. It was in Edinburgh.
Governmental was at the very first one in a very cold room at the Brigade.
Oh, right. Okay, well, I was at Tannet. I obviously wasn't at the first one. I thought I'd been at the first one. But
there were 6 of us on that.
but definitely at that time, the focus was on how can cultural organisations reduce their carbon footprint, and it's fascinating to hear that the journey has come to the point where we are trying to investigate how artists can impact transformational change, because we all agree that is exactly what's needed. I'm glad that we're experimenting in the arena that you're advising us. And I wonder, can you guide us a bit at this point? Is there anything that you can give us as tips for hints for how we move forward? And audience members, both online and in the room, please start thinking about questions for Ben, because Creative Carbon Scotland is actually an incredibly influential organisation, both here in Scotland, but in the UK, but also across Europe and internationally. So if we can work in partnership on this project with Creative Carbon Scotland,
we really do have the opportunity to influence that transformational change that we're after.
I'm not sure that I yet have any really good tips about transformational change because it's difficult. There are some techniques and tools and systemic change, and there's an organization called New Philanthropic Capital, NPC, which is a sort of think tank for charities. It's got quite a good thing on their website about really thinking about systemic change, and it uses things like the 3 Horizons process and so on. So well worth looking at NPC. Couple of things that perhaps to say, well, I was talking to an old colleague who's here today earlier, and just one of the things that's perhaps important is we've now been around remarkably for 13 years, and this started off as a sort of mad idea back in 2010, actually, and I think that just being here and being persistent, and I think you've done the same, Liz, at Fablevision, just continuing to be there is a really important part of bringing about change, actually, because there's somebody to ring, there's somebody who's interested or whatever, and just hanging on in there, whether in whatever field you're working, I think is a really important part of this, because at times it has been a bit of a lonely journey, but increasingly we're seeing more and more people, including the Cabinet Secretary, thinking about the things we're doing, and I think that is partly about persistence. The other thing that's interesting me is that as a theatre director, I was always quite interested in numbers. I like doing big shows with full audiences, and I'm still interested in numbers in order to get the impact that we want. And there's we're talking at the moment to we're about to have a conversation really with the Gulbenkian Foundation, a big funder from Portugal but also the UK, which is interested in how we scale up the impact and influence of community-based and community-led art climate interventions. And I think that's really interesting because over the years I've seen a lot of really good work going on with 20 people in a room here or 20 people in a room there, but how you really get impact from that on a much larger scale. So I think thinking that through and really working out where you take this next, if you do a project, how you not just report on it or whatever, but actually how you manage to get that into strategies and policies and so on, so it maybe can be replicated or copied in some way or can be rolled out in some way. So I think there is a challenge often in sort of socially engaged work in getting scale, and I think that's a really big one that I think we need to work through. I'm not sure that's, and I think that is about transformational change because the change that we're seeking is in society, and I think it's all very well doing it yourself or with a small group, but actually we've got to shift the whole of society big time.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, over to you. Any questions? There's one in the middle row there. I recognize that man. I think we need to speak into the mic, Chris, or it won't be heard by our online participants. Yeah. If you tell me the question, I can repeat it.
We're going to have to stop, Chris, because we can't repeat that for everybody.
The question is about epic, the use of the term epic in terms of, in your speech you talked about. Yeah.
I don't think I have an answer to how you connect the epic and the socially engaged practice. And except that one of the things that I hope, going to talk to the Gulbenkian Foundation about is our role not as an organization that does the art, because we don't do art, but we connect the art to other people, policymakers and what have you. And actually, there's a couple of things I want to say. One is actually, I think socially engaged practice might be able to help individuals think on an epic scale, which I think is difficult. So there is something there, maybe. But also, I think our job at Creative Carbon Scotland is to do that scaling up, is to say, actually, here's a really interesting project from which we learned this. How can this be applied across society in a wider range of places, or whatever it may be? What have we learned here that can be used more widely? So I think there might be a sort of micro epicness, if you like, because one of the big challenges is not just for artists, but for individuals in society, is that we find it very difficult to look ahead. We find it very difficult to look at those time scales, to look at that geographical scale. We discount people who are further away. We discount people who are in the future, for example. We give them less value, which happens all the time. So maybe one thing that socially engaged practice could do is really strengthen that, help people understand that and really strengthen that way of thinking. But then a thing that maybe Creative Carbon Scotland or others in the room is say, okay, how can we use that? How can we get that into the Cabinet Secretary's head? So he's not just talking about emotional engagement or whatever, but actually he's thinking, right, we need to put this into our policies and our strategies and our funding to make sure this happens much more widely.
Yay. I think we can all agree with that. Thanks very much, Ben. Okay, so I think we need to move on to our next. Could you stay with us, Ben, and we'll move on to...
Okay, that's fine.
So unfortunately, yes, we have...
Use that microphone.
Right, okay.
Sorry, it's a little bit technically challenging, this.
And I'll explain why. This is because Leah Ghilardi, unfortunately, has had a terrible family emergency and is unable to be with us in person in the room. However, we do plan to bring her into the room on Zoom. Hopefully, this will work.
Just have to wait for her, and here she is, as by magic. Hello.
And there she is.
Now the question is, Leah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes,
I can hear you. Hooray, very slick.
Yay!
Okay, so Liz, you will need to now come to the podium with this very nice bluebell background. It's actually my garden. I took that photograph last week. And you can now have a conversation with Leah. Unfortunately, you're standing in my garden. We're all in this virtual space.
Looks wonderful.
And unfortunately, Leah will not be able to see us because she's had to turn the YouTube stream off, which obviously will cause But she can hear us all very well, and we will take it from there. Over to you.
Thank you, Graham. Good morning, Leah. And
Good morning,
thank you so much
good morning, everyone.
For joining. Oh, there's a slight delay, so I need to be very careful that I let you speak. For those of you who have been following our Turning the Tide project, you will be aware that we have run a series of webinars, taking Ben's advice about helping the artists to understand the issues first before we embark on the project. And our first webinar was looking at artists involved in socially engaged practice. Our second one, led by yourself, Leah, was looking at cultural planning and the role of cultural planning. And where you left us at the end of that webinar was with the conclusion that we can't tackle any issues, problems, or any issues or problems in isolation, and that includes climate change, Rather, what we need is an holistic approach to placemaking that's generative and creative, building on what already exists there. And you also touched on governance as being the key. So as Turning the Tide, we're experimenting with the role of socially engaged artists and employing that practice. So I'm wondering, that approach you're describing is cultural planning. Why do you think that cultural planning is important in tackling climate change?
Yeah. Okay, first of all, is it okay when I speak? Can you hear? And it's not distorted, it's okay.
It's perfect.
Yeah? Fine. So, first of all, I have to thank Ben for an incredibly good intervention and very eloquently put. We need to really make a transformation in our thinking, and we need to do it now. And the artists can help us imagine a new world, reimagine the society in which we live. Artists can help us to imagine the impossible. What seems impossible now, they are already imagining it. And even better if they are imagining it with our communities or the communities they work in. I'm a bit of a cultural urbanist, so I work a lot with cities, and I've been working for 30 years with notions of cultural planning. Um, in this case, cultural planning is not the kind of North American notion of here we are, we do a bit of a strategy for a culture, and we mobilize the cultural resources, and we will do a bit of regeneration through that, and there will be trickle down to the local economy, and everything will be fine. Because nothing has been fine in 30 years here. So we've gone from the 1990s, in which we thought there was hope for change in society, especially in the West and in the UK, to a society now. I'm now in Italy. We are celebrating the 25th of April today, which is the liberation of fascism. And we have demonstrations across Italy of neo-fascists, really, once again. So we have to start from the beginning. There is a massive rethink that we have to do in society, which is not just about the environment. It is about the economy. It is about the type of values we want to put forward in the way we live together. It is about how we want to put, instead of the kind of economic advantage, the kind of competition, the neoliberal thinking about competition of individuals, etc. Instead of that, we need to start thinking in terms of human development once again. And how we do that is by involving artists, is by going through creative processes, is by engaging in art and culture at local level. So now we can get into the discussion, how we do it at local level, etc. Now, is that okay, Liz? Is this message?
Yes, absolutely. And I'd like to involve Ben in this conversation too, because as you said, exactly what Ben was talking about is that transformational change, and how do we do it? So yes, let's all talk together if we can.
Yeah. No, if we can, Ben, if you can, if you want to intervene. In my experience, the projects I am involved in at the moment is projects that start from the top of cities in Europe mostly, that are asking themselves, how do we involve the communities? How do we bring to the table of our city the communities that are left behind, especially after COVID? Michael Sandel, the philosopher, was saying, okay, the COVID-19 really shone a light on the fact that our society, at least the West, was not morally prepared for it, not just logistically, etc., morally. And this is, I think, the point where we are at. We are still thinking, in my view, at a society that measures success in economic terms. in terms of productivity, in terms of how much each individual contributes by working hard and competing, etc., and to the society and to the world. But there is no plan B. The world is imploding. I mean, socially, okay, but also, as we know, in terms of the environment. So where is the plan B here? The plan B we have to develop in now. And I think, in my view, it has to start with putting different values at the core of society. The values of human development, like Amartya Sen said it 30 years ago, we need to think in terms of giving the people the opportunities to develop themselves or to develop the kind of lives they want to live. This is the basis of it. And then we start from there. The artists can imagine for us that kind of human development, that kind of a society or cities that are based on that human development. They can help enlightening. They can help us think better, think differently.
Yes, and what we are coming up against, though, and I know that this is Ben's been talking about this too, is that no matter how much we experiment, no matter how much we demonstrate that another way is possible, those experiments remain as microcosms and never seem to become embedded. And you spoke a little bit about how that might, how could we get over those barriers, do you think?
Yeah. Well, there are tools of engagement that are available still now. Let's forget elections for now. So we need to think in terms of citizens' participation, community participation. It's not just engagement in on micro projects, etc. That's okay. The micro epic, I like that idea also. We can think of that, and that's a step towards the big transformation that we want to enact. But at local level, we have to think every time we have a problem. Okay, how do we confront that problem? That problem we confronted by understanding how that place works in a deeper sense, 360 degrees. Well, what are the memories of that place? What is the history of that place? What is the kind of current governance of that place? What are the narratives that the local communities share? What are their needs, desires, especially expectations? What are the resources that are there? If we look at the kind of planet B idea, we have to think of saying, do we have resources? We have heritage in many places. If you take Europe and outside, every little place, every city has resources that have been abandoned because of austerity, because of different reasons. We have, in a way, to look at each place, map out exactly what is going on, the social, the economic, but also the historical dynamics, map out the narratives, and the artists can help in all this. Well, once we have done that, what I am experimenting with is with citizens' assemblies, for example. The citizens' assemblies, following from a mapping, can help us generate ideas, can help us clarify where we should intervene. Recently, we worked with a citizens' assembly and we discovered that there were various buildings and physical spaces that were abandoned in a place in the Czech Republic. So we are now trying with the local community to revive old trades, businesses that were there before. We are trying to redirect investment into those places that have been left behind, abandoned, etc., and to reviving that. And that's one way. But as we said, we went via a mapping, and we had artists working with us, working with the community, and then we went through citizens' assemblies. We could use participatory budgeting. We could use other tools at the end of the process of mapping and understanding. context of a place. So
Yeah.
it's acting on micro level, but thinking bigger.
Yes, and we spoke in the webinar, just very, very briefly at the end, we spoke about governance, and I wondered if you had, if you were able to expand on that for us, because yes, there are, as long as land, for example, is in private ownership, as long as heritage or facilities are in private ownership, or it's difficult for us as artists to impact on that. I wonder if you can tease out a bit for us about what you meant by governance.
I mean, working as I do with a lot with architects and urbanists across Europe, you can see that the kind of planning system is still pretty vertical, although we talk about the 15-minute city, we talk about connecting neighborhoods, as they do in Mexico City with the Lab for the City, for example. Splendid examples of connecting communities and connecting different parts of the city via artistic projects, etc. But what the problem is that the system we have now is still too inflexible for this new thinking. So often we go via neighborhood plans. We do neighborhoods referendum, and we listen, we engage the local community in telling us what they would like to see happening. We don't go like often they do in Sweden, and Iwona knows that, with the plan already done and saying, hey, do you like this? We're going to put a park here. We're going to close down that station. Do you like it or not? Tell us something about this. I think that method is a bit old school, and it hasn't been successful. It's not working anymore. So we go via the mapping, and we go sometimes into the kind of neighborhood referendum, neighborhood planning, and via that, we just sometimes come out the other end with the community land trust. And we work at micro level, incrementally, doing a 5-10 years plan and say, first thing we do this, then in 2 years' time we do this. But the important thing is that the communities are ready for this. And to be ready for this participatory engagement, etc., we need the work of the artists upstream and the innovativeness of the forms of engagement of the artists upstream. Because our communities are demoralized, as you can imagine, and we know that. They feel left behind. If you looked at Twitter yesterday, I glanced at it, there was a hashtag called Cretins. And I looked at it. And this was like a group of British people from all over the country, apparently gathered in London to protest against the fact that they were left behind, that nobody listens to them, etc. One was even saying, okay, now we have to drink coffee all the time instead of tea. And you understand that. If you had an artist working with that community, you would do a project on that. You would laugh at this because you wouldn't call them cretins, because that's the ultimate humiliation that we can give to our community. And we are responsible for what they are saying as well, for not having helped them to really engage more and to have stopped this kind of tide of populism, really.
Okay, so community ownership, but we need to put processes in to make sure that they are ready to take that on.
Yeah.
Take that. Leah, are we able to open this discussion now to our audience in the room? And I know you can't see them, but hopefully we can feed the questions into you. There are also questions coming in online, I hope, that somebody can feed to me to put to you. So do we have any questions or comments or feedback? In the middle there, yeah.
Does this work? Oh, hello. I have a question about why the word transformation rather than revolution and radical. because we are talking about, in the subtext of all of this, the size of the change required is monumental, and particularly the size of the change required by the West. And that in working with the public as artists, we are in a way preparing them for revolution. Revolution in the way we live, the way we consume has to end, and even the very sort of mental and emotional preparation for the fact that our political and governmental systems have failed to stop the fossil fuel industry. And we need to look at ourselves differently and our own anthropocenic participation in our system and work out how we become the kind of people who can shift this. So my question is about why transformation, not revolution?
Can you hear that clearly?
Partly. So
Why transformation? Why not revolution? Because that's what we're talking about, really.
You're talking to me. In the 70s, I thought we did the revolution, at least in Italy and in France. But hey, look at the world today, did we? Okay. So I now feel very strongly that the word transformation, and Ben was right in using it. I think we need to transform the way we think about ourselves in the society, the way we think about society. So I'm just pretty tired of people constantly telling me, if we do this investment, then the community will benefit. I'm tired of the trickle down. I'm tired. What kind of revolution can you do in a system that is still completely capitalist? You can only hope at the moment for a benign form of capitalism, but also because we are teetering at the edges of disaster here on planet. So we got to act, I think, transformationally at micro level, start from there, but having always an eye, having a communication, international connections, exchanges, like you're doing this now with this project. You're bringing in artists from outside as well, not just artists that are based on local level. And so that they communicate, they bring in new ideas. We need to act at local level, really in a deeper, granular level, in transforming the mindset of our communities and our own mindset. From this idea of we have to be productive, we have to die working. What if I don't want to work anymore? What if I want to achieve something else in my life? What if I want to pursue some other thing in my life, some hobby, some thinking, some change my profession or something? It's not allowed these days because you would die. You would not be supported. There would not be any welfare supporting you. So going from this situation, which I'm describing to you, to a complete different world, it's a journey. It's a journey. It's not just a revolution, I think.
Thank you. And we have a question down here at the front. Wait for the microphone because the people online won't be able to see.
Hello,
to hear
this
them.
is just a quick follow-up from our online audience. For Ben, please. You spoke a bit about Amitav Ghosh. Could you say a little bit more about the book you talked about and why it's of interest to you? Thanks.
Actually, there are two books. There are two great books, which I would really recommend. I can't do them justice. Amitav Ghosh, the first one is The Great Derangement, and in that he writes about really why artists find it difficult to work about, to make art about climate change. And those of you who don't know his work, as a novelist, he does write very enormous spanning trilogies about the opium wars and things like this. He's a big writer. The second book actually is even more important, I think. It's called The Nutmeg's Curse, and it really ties in the connection. It really highlights the connection between climate change and colonialism, and it highlights the importance of narratives in addressing both those issues. I'm not sure, I can't, in the time that we've got, I don't have just time to do justice to his work, but I would, if there are two books to read, I would really recommend those two. I think they're extraordinary pieces of work and thinking. He really changed what I was thinking about, and the Nutmeg's Curse particularly opens up a whole new and important area for many, many people. Go and read it. They're not long books, but they're well worth reading. So Amitav Ghosh, Amitav, new word, Ghosh. His two books, terrific.
Thanks, Ben. And we've got somebody in the middle here.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up from the conversation earlier, and in regards to social change, I'm interested in your thoughts about the practical solutions or tools that we can actually use for this, as I anticipate there will be a lot of resistance from a lot of powerful entities. So just wondering your thoughts about actual practical ways we achieve this.
So practical ways to achieve that. Could we ask each of our speakers to maybe give us some pointers?
Practical ways.
Practical ways of how do we achieve this transformational change?
While you're thinking, Leah, I'll say something. I'm not sure I have the answer yet, and actually there are a number of tools, particularly about systemic thinking. And just to answer a little bit about the question about radical and revolution and so on, I think a lot of what we need to do is radical and is revolutionary. I'm not sure in my bit of the world it's particularly helpful to call it that, because I think that will scare some of the people off that we need to bring into the project. But that's a personal thing, and I've always worked from sort of within. I like to think I'm the mole within the establishment rather than somebody outside the establishment. That's where I've had most effect in the past. I think there are some really good tools to think about systemic change, and I would recommend the three horizons, which is thinking about really, the first horizon is what we do now, the second horizon is how we bring about change, the third horizon is really about where we want to get to, and I think it's worth looking at that, and that is really a very basic understanding of it on my part. There may be people in the room who can do much more, say much more about that. But we at Creative Carbon Scotland are going to spend some time ourselves trying to understand how to bring about transformational change, because we don't have a methodology. And what I hope that we'll be able to do in a year or a year and a half is to be able to provide a methodology to a much wider group. One of the things we're going to do is, ideally, depending on some funding that comes through, is actually work with a small group of interesting thinkers in organizations to see how they could think about transformational change themselves. And then, having practiced with them, we can then open that up more widely. But I do also just want to go back to that stuff about the Gulbenkian Foundation, where that thing about how you make this larger and make this scale up. One of the important things, perhaps, Leah, it might be worth touching upon, is what's really important at the moment is that the evaluation, the learning that we get from projects, the really valuable benefits and so on that come out of them are not the indicators that a lot of policymakers need. And I think sometimes we need to bring these two sides more closely together so that we may have to tweak a project in some way to deliver the sort of things that the policymakers need, so that they can then go to their bosses and the budget holders and the Angus Robertsons and say, look, here is the evidence, here are the outcomes from these projects. We need to fund more of these, we need to build these into strategy. So you can see that I do tend to work from within the establishment, because I think you need to use the levers there to get that change. I'm not sure that answers your question, but I offer it anyway.
Leah, do you want to come back on that, the practical?
Yeah, no, I think practically, of course, trying to mainstream exchange. The more we exchange information, the more we kind of look at what we have done, assess it, and see what the next steps can be. But the more we share the knowledge we accumulate in pilots, in projects that we do, the better it is. Now, which forms this exchange takes, we will have to invent them. We can use still social media or reinvent the social media for our use. We can do it in different ways. But just to go back to the principles, I would say I think we are forgetting one thing fundamental to me and to my experience of having worked for 30 years in cultural planning is once again is education. So we need first of all to bring every single individual to the table of learning as much as possible about the world, about how the world is changing, about society, about anything. So the first thing that I'm missing, I think, in Anglo-Saxon society is access to all forms of education, informal, importantly as well, because we have abandoned that kind of informal education for people who normally work in different times, the hands-on care or whatever, and don't have time to follow a normal path of education. We need to rethink that too, and we need to bring it universal to everybody. The other thing that has been discussed now for a long time, 10 years at least, is the basic universal income. If we need to go back to rethink the economic value of individuals as well. So we say it's not just the productivity that the individual brings, but it's also their creativity, their individuality, etc. So we need to give time to individuals to learn what they want to learn and therefore provide educational institutions, organizations, etc. The third thing is more culture, more provision of culture. But again, because of the constraint we are now in terms of the climate crisis, we have to rethink the way we produce performances, the way we have to scale down perhaps the big festivals where everybody moved around from across the world and overpopulated cities for 2 days. We have to perhaps to maybe abolish even the cities of culture as they are now, as with big events, etc., scale them down. At neighborhood level, I am seeing projects now across Europe which are with communities that are rediscovering old cultural centers that have been abandoned or defunded, etc. And these places are now hosting productions coming from the nearby main towns, etc. So we are learning to share productions. We are learning to share cultural resources. We need to learn that too, as in terms of sustainability and in terms of educating everybody, in terms of having everybody having access to culture in the first instance.
Yeah, great. And cultural planning, the cross-sectoral practices of
yes,
exchange.
But first of all, you need individuals to reinject confidence, to reinject optimism, to reinject happiness in individuals and in the places they live in. So it's a holistic work. Every discipline has to work together, and this is the learning also that we are going through now. I see with the teams I work with, I'm learning from architects to talk louder than they do, and they are learning to listen to other people as well, which is good.
Thanks, Leah. Do we have another online question from some of our online participants? We need a microphone. Thank you.
Hello there. Ben, thanks for responding to Callie earlier. This is from Lindsay and for either speaker. A challenge in engagement work is projects often run out of steam, money, time, or do not incorporate both a short and long-term evaluation in funding structure or delivery. To do authentic evaluation on community impact and change, we need to revisit the place, people, the story many months, sometimes years later if needed. This is part of the story and is imperative for moving forward and bringing people, communities, partners, government bodies with us. We must bring the community with us in the story and evaluation. How can we create a more common practice in funding structure and project templates to include short and long-term evaluation to better evidence change, impact and project learning?
Thanks. So this is about longitudinal evaluation. Leah, did you hear that? Yeah. I think Ben, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it's really tricky, but I'm glad to say that we've had an embedded PhD working with us on this very question for the last 3 years. And Emma will be publishing her evaluation tool cupboard or framework or whatever she chooses to call it shortly, where she's just getting towards the end of her PhD, because I think it is really challenging, and the long-term bit is particularly problematic. And that comes back perhaps to that persistence that Creative Carbon Scotland is still here, and we can go back to those people some years later after a project or whatever if we build that in. Because I think very often you get funding-led projects that last for a short time and then stop. And the advantage of having somebody who's still wittering on about the same thing all those years later means that we can, I think, keep that long-term thing going. Crucially, I think we need to build this into projects and build it into budgets at the very beginning so people are clear about the evaluation from the start, because otherwise it's not going to happen. It's not going to be built in. And this is a big problem, I think, with EU projects and other projects generally, that we're not allowed in some way to build that in, but we just have to demand it, I think.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ben. Leah, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, as you know, Liz, we've done evaluation projects for many years, and tangibles and intangibles are difficult to evaluate over time. The problem is that at the beginning you get the funding for doing that. You may have a baseline, so you may have set out all your outcomes as well over time, but then the situation changes. Suddenly there is something that comes into play in a certain area, in a certain group of people, etc. So evaluation again also has to be rethought in a way to say, why do we need to evaluate this particular project? What do we need to demonstrate? And why do we need to demonstrate this? Is it because we need more funding? Is it because we genuinely want to measure the distance traveled by the artists involved or the communities involved? And if we want to measure the distance traveled, let's say, by the artists and the communities involved, why do we want to do that? Is it because we want to ask for more funding for the next project, which implies then that we are only there temporarily in a place and we're never really there for the long run? And if we are only there temporarily there, should we even initiate projects that we know are not going to be maintained, are not going to be there for the long haul?
Yeah, great, thanks. And if we've time for one quick question, we really do have to stick to time. So we've one last question. I think somebody here in the front row has got a hand up. Oh, this man here. Oh.
What a build-up, that'd be a good question. Thanks very much. Yeah, for me, one of the things of the role of the artist in society is to listen for silences. And we've had some fantastic discussion here today, but we've not talked about the genocide which is happening at the moment. We've not talked about the desperate need for peace as part of the process of addressing and bringing about the kind of revolutionary transformation that we're talking here. So I think one of the roles I would suggest, I'm interested in the views of the artist, is to bring forward these things into the focus of public debate. Because at the moment we're moving away, we're in this cultural war where they're destroying the opportunities for people to study art, to take part in art, and at the same time massively increasing the securitization of borders and the obscene investment in war. And if we cannot bring that central to discussions like this in these kind of rooms, then I think we are missing a vital element of the discussion and the way forward. Thank you.
We're back to that holistic approach again. Did you hear that, Leah?
I think so. Yeah, yes. Yeah, we're back to that. And
So very quickly from both of you, we've got 5 minutes left. Very quickly, you want to address that? Who wants to go first?
no, Ben, because he's there, he can.
We've been thinking about this at Creative Carbon Scotland, and because we don't know what our precise role in this is. And one thing I've written a blog that actually is being discussed, probably even as we speak, at our team meeting, which highlights the fact that there are numerous conflicts going on at the moment, and I think it's important to remember this. Ones that are not spoken about very much in Myanmar, in Sudan, and so on, which are really not getting the attention that Ukraine and Gaza are. And we need to remember this and all the smaller conflicts that are also taking place. There is a clear role for artists and arts organizations to play here. We're still struggling to work out what it is that we at Creative Carbon Scotland should be doing, because it's somewhere removed from what our particular focus is. And one thing that we're focusing on this blog, what we've done is we've looked at the, if you like, what the climate change implications of war are, and what the war implications of climate change are. One of the things I think we have sought to do over the years and are continuing to seek to do is to maybe provide information that otherwise isn't out there. So we've drawn together quite a lot of bits of research that we can do, because we've got the time, if you like, to do the thinking and then present that more openly and more widely. So that's what we're doing. I don't think I'm qualified to say what others should be doing. I agree that there needs to be discussion about it, but it's not the only thing there needs to be discussion about. Climate change, the inequality, which are causes of these conflicts, as well as symptoms of them, are longer lasting than any one of them, I would say.
Thanks, Ben. And very, very quickly, briefly.
No, for me, as I said earlier, it's a question also of saying climate change is not just climate change, it's a society change that we need. It's a complete rethink of the kind of society we want to live in. If you just focus on that, then you have to start thinking holistically and think, okay, what kind of housing, what kind of cities, what kind of leisure, what kind of parks, how do we want our cultural institutions to change, shrink, develop, come down to museums, co-collect, who knows, museums are schools. The innovation is endless in that potential. But the first thing is, it's not just climate change, it's society change that we need.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any last brief thoughts from both of you or either of you, or anything you want to say that you haven't said?
I think it was something that Leah said, or possibly that somebody asked about. It's made me very pleased about, I think it was the education thing you were talking about. Our Green Teas program has been going since 2013, and it has taken many forms. And in a way, that's a way of just opening up. It's an opportunity for informal discussion. And that has been very valuable, I think, over the years. Just to inform us and say, oh, we ought to be doing something about this, to bring other people in and so on. And just hearing today has made me rather proud of the fact that the Green Teas is still going on in the myriad ways in which it has. It itself has transformed a lot since that first time with 6 people and a kettle and a box of tea bags in a very cold room. But it continues to be successful and popular. And I think that's because of what you were talking about, Leah, about that need for people to learn and people to understand and people to grow their knowledge. I think it's an important part of that.
Super. Thank you so much.
It's very easy to do, by the way. That's the thing. It's it needs some staff time, but actually I would really recommend it as a model. All you do need is a kettle and a box of tea bags and a few people in a room, and you've got that conversation going. And that's why it's called the Green Tea.
Thanks, Ben. and we're to time. And yes, can we thank both of our speakers very much indeed.
Oh, thank you, guys.
Ben
Thank
Twist,
you.
Leah Ghilardi. That was fantastic. What a tremendous way to start our day, and tremendous discussions in the room. Thank you so much. We're now going to have a short 15-minute comfort break. Be back here though before 15:15 because we need to start bang on time. Thank you to both of you again.
Ciao. Bye. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you so much, Leah. I hope you'll join us for the rest of the day.
Ciao. Bye. Bye. Bye.
No, it's fine. They wanted to make you full screen, but I did.